Alright, so today I'm interviewing my grandma for my History 134 extra credit assignment. The topic is over World War II. My first question is, what is your most vivid memory during the time of World War II?
My mother and I were out on the back porch of our home in St. Augustine, Texas, when the fire sirens began to blow and the church bells began to ring. Tears were running down my mother's face, and she said, "Thank God the war is over." I was happy to see my uncles coming home, fathers coming home to their families.
Alright, question number 2. How did Texas change for the war?
The war changed Texas when everyone had to change their lifestyle. There were rations put on sugar, coffee, eggs, butter, and cheese. Meat you could not get unless you raised your own meat and killed it. I remember going with my mother to pick out or pick up sugar and other rationed foods we were allowed to have. Mother would save small amounts of sugar for birthdays and Christmas so she could bake us cakes, pies, and cookies. During Christmas, those cakes were so pretty. I can remember some being on top of the ice box back then. Most people didn't even have electricity. And I can remember we put up a Christmas tree, but there were so few toys under the tree. But we did have some good food to eat at that time. We ate what we could and what we had.
Alright, question 3. How did people feel during the war?
People were slightly afraid during the time that they were bombing Pearl Harbor. On the radio, we could hear about people dying and about this one bombing this France or some other place, and everybody would sort of get afraid. But we loved America, and we knew that we had to fight for what we believe in. And we had to fight to be free. So the family that we were sad when they lost loved ones, and daddies wouldn't be coming home to their families. So the war, we thought, will soon be over. We put it in our minds, and every day we would say a prayer for the ones that was over there. We were afraid at times. I don't recall being terrified, but we'd listen to the radio at times, and when the president would speak, he tried to calm us down and tell us everything was going to be fine. But then everybody wondered, was he really telling the truth?
Alright, next question. Was there any racism during this time?
I don't recall racism during this time. My family was friends with black families. I played with children who were my friends. I still think about the good times that we all had together. We went to school, and there were separate schools at that time, but men worked with black people. Women worked with black women. And there just wasn't any racism, not in St. Augustine at that time, that I recall.
Alright, how were women affected by the war?
Women had to take on a lot of responsibility, and they had to be hard-working women. They took on work that the men had done in the past, raising children by themselves without a husband there, raising gardens so that they could feed their children, raising animals so they would have meat, taking care of a house that might need a new roof or whatever. And they worked in a lot of jobs that men had done before they left for service. My mother sewed uniforms for the soldiers, as did many of the other women in St. Augustine. And during this time, they had to be very, very strong for their families.
All right. How was it like being a kid in World War II?
The kids were happy. We played. We went to school. We enjoyed all the pleasures that we could, but we didn't have movies. We didn't have TVs. We sat around and would be around the adults, but the adults, they usually talked if they had some disagreements and things like that with the war. They talked out of the room of the children, and the children would still play outside, and we would read books. We would write little small letters to our daddies when they was in the war, and that was about all the children did.
My last question is, how do you see the war now that you've grown up?
How do I see the war now that I've grown up? I think that we still are trying to protect America just like we were then. Our families work hard, and I think that even back then, when the children were waiting for their daddies to come home and everything, we learned to love and respect and go to church, go to school, and do things together that I wished we still had it today. Because the world today has changed so much from the world that I grew up in then.
I know I said that was my last question, but can you talk a little bit about if you had any relatives in World War II?
Yes, I had several of my uncles, but I remember one in particular. My Uncle Freeman came home, and he told of picking up dead bodies, wounded soldiers, and carrying them to the hospital or trying to save their lives. Uncle Freeman never got over the war. It always lived with him. He had nightmares, and finally he committed suicide, which is sad to have to go through things like that during war. But we need to protect America. God bless our country.
All right. Thank you, Grandma.